Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the Vibe Daily Chat group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily Podcast. It is day 101, and we are continuing to make our way through First Kings. So excited to be back again, joined by my wife, Victoria, who's with us, and failed to mention before, but she's been rocking one of our merch that we love because he first loved us, 1 John 4:19, and she's been wearing that all week, but yeah, check that out if you're interested. I think there's more information in this video, but you can purchase your own as well if you like. But yeah, we pick up here in 1 Kings chapter 14. Last left off really with kind of judgment on King Jeroboam, who was the first king of Israel divided. So now that we have two kingdoms, Judah and Israel, Jeroboam is that king of Israel specifically. And yeah, he's wilding. He's worshiping other gods. He has led the people of Israel to worship other gods.
Yeah.
And so judgment has been sent upon him. And verse 14, we got to see exactly how that plays out. So talk to me a little bit about chapter 14 and what jumped out to you here.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that, like, here we go. I feel like he's reminding me of Saul right now, where it's kind of like, go in disguise. Now, Saul disguised himself to go to the median to, like, go and inquire. But here, Jeroboam sending his wife to go and inquire if he would get better or not. And
His son.
Or his son. So if his son would get better or not. And I think it's really interesting that this prophet's blind, y'all. Like, he's blind, but still the Lord is just like, nope, she's coming and she's disguised. And so before she even gets in the door, like, first of all, she could have been standing in front of him. He's blind. But before he even gets to the door, he's kind of like, girl, why are you trying to play? I know you're here. And he just goes straight into, like, the judgment. So, like, he didn't waste no time. Yeah.
No, I thought it was, like you said, it was just straight to, hey, this is what's gonna happen. Your son gonna die, but as soon as you step foot in the city, he gonna die. Like, and essentially, man, the judgment on Jeroboam is being played out, and he's kind of clear in what's going to happen. And so he's like, yeah, this is the day.
Yeah.
This is it. And this is what will happen. And so I don't know. I did. It was messed up that he sent his wife. I just feel like that's not the news that she probably wanted to hear.
No.
About her son, and now she has to go deliver that news to her husband, and tell him what's going to happen. And so, yeah, that's exactly what happened. He does die exactly as Ahijah, the prophet, had said. The son did. All of Israel mourned and all those things, right?
Yeah.
And then it just kind of gives us as for the rest of the events, right? So this sort of refrain is kind of going to be said over and over again for, like, the kings that we will encounter.
Yeah.
I think it's important to kind of point out that First Kings, Second Kings, the Chronicles, even First and Second Samuel, their purpose is primarily to show God's influence and impact on the kingdom of Israel and Judah kind of throughout history, right? And so we obviously see how God is involved or what he thinks of things, but there were entirely other historical, records of just like this is what they did,
Yeah.
right, or what they accomplished during their time that didn't have anything particularly to do with God per se. And so that's why they keep referring to like, hey, there's all these other records out there about what Jeroboam did.
Yeah.
What you need to know for the purposes of this book is what he did was sinful in the eyes of the Lord.
Yeah.
And the Lord brought this upon him because of that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of the difference in the context. But again, just to kind of point out, because we'll see that over and over again, it refers to different kings. Like you can find the rest of their writings and accomplishments, you know, and essentially in a different book. But yeah, anything else kind of on Jeroboam before we kind of move back to Rehoboam and what he's been doing this whole time?
No, the Lord was done with him.
He was, but you know what? It's interesting. We don't stop hearing his name.
We don't.
I wanted to call this out now. I think it's crazy. Like, and just, I don't know. We constantly hear in scripture the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You constantly hear like a Moses or like a Joshua. You constantly hear stuff like David.
Yeah,
right?
so okay.
Jeroboam's legacy is how he turned from the Lord.
Yes.
Because there's so many kings that will come thereafter and they're like, he was as bad as Jeroboam.
Exactly.
Like, or worse than Jeroboam. Like Jeroboam is like the measuring stick for
evil.
Like that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
It is crazy that like he is the measuring stick from turning from the Lord. And so like, although yes, the Lord is done with him, we're not, because we're going to hear his name kind of constantly throughout First and Second Kings. So this starts kind of the back and forth between Israel and Judah. So we'll kind of do this. The way the book is written is essentially as a kingdom starts. We will go through what happened with that king. If another king began somewhere in the middle of that, we'll kind of get to them later, right?
Yeah, you kind of jump to them after you finish off that king.
Exactly. So it'll kind of go back and forth where it talks about, well, in the middle of that king's reign, this king became, you know, that kind of thing, because we're dealing with both Israel and Judah here. So they talk a little bit about Rehoboam in the second half of 14 here. Anything you thought was interesting as they looked at his reign as he was over the kingdom of Judah?
Yeah, I think it's sad because this is where it gets confusing sometimes, because sometimes we think like, okay, the kings of Israel, we know they're evil. The kings of Judah, who stayed pretty much quote unquote with the Lord, right? Because the Levites are still there and everything. Like the king of Judah and the temple, we would think that they are also like good, but sometimes it gets messy because sometimes they're both evil. And so here we have Jeroboam, and these names be so similar. Jeroboam of Israel cutting up, you know, leading all the people of Israel to sin. But then we still have Rehoboam now in verse 22, that Judah now was doing what was evil on the side of the Lord, and provoking God to jealousy, because they built for themselves high places and pillars and Asherim and stuff like that. And so here we are, the people who should be for God are not.
Yeah.
And so it's heartbreaking, honestly, so that it happened so quickly. But but now his son Abijam, which is interesting, they both had the same names and their sons had similar names. Like Jeroboam's son was Abijah, and now Rehoboam's son is Abijam.
Yeah.
Come on, y'all. We gotta switch up these names.
You know, like
where did Peter, James, and John's come? Like, come on.
That's not much better. We read, Jesus had like 2 disciples named James and 2 disciples named Simon
and Judas,
and so that wouldn't have helped us either. Okay, so yeah, even those ones that become more common for us are still difficult. But yeah, speaking of kind of again, Judah did go off. I thought it was interesting that, you know, they point out that Egypt comes and kind of steals all these gold shields that like Solomon had made. So you kind of see even some of God's judgment even on the people of Judah, and some of the things that happen. And then, you know, they're also just kind of trying to explain now why they're bronze instead of gold.
Yeah.
When they go into the treasury. But
which is interesting because Solomon just had this favor with Egypt because he married one of Pharaoh's daughters, right? And now it seems like there's this animosity between Egypt and Judah now, and that they're raiding their temple.
Yeah. Good. So then we get to chapter 15, and so now this is King Jeroboam is still king at this point, but Rehoboam has died, and so now Abijam is king, still during the same time that again Jeroboam is still king. So we get to see his rule, and he essentially walks in the same sins as his father before him, right? That he had committed. So the same things that Rehoboam had done had not necessarily changed anything, had not become better, which we'll come to see. Some choose to do, which means that all of them had a choice, right? Yeah. But he continues to live in that way, and then and also has some war between he and Jeroboam, right? And so there was some of that. It started with his father Rehoboam, who was at war with Jeroboam, and he kind of continues that as well. Anything that jumps out to you as we deal with King Abijam?
Yeah. There's not much on him, honestly. It's like, yeah, he became king, he died.
Yeah.
Like, and his son reigned in his place. Like, he was evil. And that's what we started seeing. It's like, he's evil and he died.
Yeah. He was only king for 3 years.
For 3 years, yeah.
Yeah.
I do love this little slight that they gave for David, though. It was like, David did everything that pleased the Lord and walked in all the ways of the Lord except for that thing he did with Uriah the Hittite. That was messed up.
They are not going to let it go.
They don't, and it follows it all the way to the New Testament.
Absolutely. They're not going to let it go.
They're not going to let it down, but
it's clear. You got to tell the whole story.
The whole story.
You got to tell the whole story.
He was right, but that was messed up.
But that was cold. That was cold. That was cold. You got to tell the whole story, man. You can't just leave out the good parts, the bad parts. Like, can we pause for a sec? Like, that got to be our story too.
It does.
Like, you can't stand testimony service when like everything is good. Like, nah, son, tell the bad parts. Tell what happened. Like, that's the problem in church today. Half the time is we walk in church and everybody blessed and highly favored.
No, we're not blessed today.
And it's like you act like you ain't never been there before. Act like you ain't never been tempted by the things I'm tempted by. You know what I'm saying? Or you ain't never done some of the stuff I'm doing right now. Don't act like that. Tell the bad parts too. Like, you know what? The Lord is kind. He's good. He has blessed me. In spite of the stuff that I did. Because I did this, that, and the other.
And you know, I like to go back to the whole like Victoria 2012. But like Victoria last week was cutting up too. Victoria last week had attitude. Okay? Victoria last week was real short-tempered. You know? Listen, me, I go that far.
You gotta tell the bad. You gotta tell the bad. But yeah, they don't forget for David. That's for sure. They tell his whole story every time. All right, so the next king, because Jeroboam is still ruling, so we're not gonna get back to king of Israel again yet. We're still in Judah's king. It's Asa. And yeah, he actually reigns for a lot longer.
Yeah, 41 years.
41 years, a long time. The same. David reigned for 40, Saul reigned for 40, Solomon reigned for 40. So he's kind of up in that range as well. And I think we probably see why, starting in verse 11.
Yeah.
You know, he did what was right in the Lord's sight, right? As his ancestor David had done. For the most part. I think it was like some things he still kind of left. But yeah, I mean, he did what was right. And you see a much longer reign, which I think was what stuck out to me. But was there anything else that stuck out to you in Asa's reign?
You know, I read over this lightly sometimes, but he removed his mother from being queen because of this image he made of Asherah, right? And he cut down her image, like, and he did away with her. And, you know, that's so not a hard thing to do. Like, we're talking about mama, right? Like, how many of us are willing to cut off whole relationships, closest relationships, because they're not walking with the Lord, like, or that they are leading others to sin, you know, or you say he's supposed to be leading this nation to God and she's leading them to sin.
Yeah.
In that part, he's like, okay, moms, if this is how we're going to be acting, I can't have you leading with me and the people, right? And I think that it takes us to that New Testament text, right? Where Jesus, like, you got to be able to love less your mother, your brothers, like anyone for the sake of me, right? Like, love me more, love those less, we read through this quickly, but geez, how much of a heart pull could this be? Where like most of us don't even wonder like halfway distance ourselves, and not for the sake of, oh, you're a bad person, oh, I can't be near you, but for the sake of like our mission is not the same right now, and you're sabotaging the mission of the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's what's more important.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it, not to go back to him, but it reminds me a little bit of the conversation we had with Jonathan and King Saul, because we were grateful. Jonathan, love that guy, man. I thought he was great story.
Yeah.
But I feel his big flaw was he did not really distance himself from his father, who had kind of gone astray, and I think the consequence was he ultimately died as well, with Saul. And so that's tough to treat. It's tough to feel like, treating family that way. But to your point, if they are, in this case, going so far against the will of God, right, to be able to remove them, from their position or from, their influence, I would say, I think it's definitely a big step that's required. But that's a good call out.
Yeah.
And he also jumped out to you. I mean, I know he kind of has this back and forth with one of the other kings of that comes along, king of Israel, and Baasha. But anything else you just thought was interesting in his rule before we move to Israel's king Nadab?
Yeah, like I said, I do feel like this is part of the whole, like, once again, although he did not worship other gods, right? It seems like as if he used this other king as his god in this situation, where he takes all the treasury out of the Lord's house to give to this king of Syria and say, like, let there be a covenant between me and you, and go break your tie with Israel, like pretty much help me deal with Israel, instead of going to the Lord and saying, Lord, help me with Israel, and so that one, and I know the Chronicles will go more in depth to like the Lord's response and how the Lord deals with Asa on this, but right here it was kind of like, come on, Asa, you can go to the Lord and he can work it out, and you don't have to take from the Lord's house to deal with your armies and all these other things that you're worried about. Like, I feel like it's a charge again,
That's a good point. And this is me now just trying to... Now I'm just verbally processing, I guess, this idea. Because I don't even know if I can think of where this answer would come. And maybe we'll come across it as we read the rest of this week or later. But like, I also just wonder... I wonder if God would have stepped in. Because, like, I feel like Israel and Judah belong to him. Like, I know his home kind of dwells in Jerusalem. That's a city he kind of picked and whatnot. But he established Israel too, right? In the kingdom there, right? When he ripped it away from Solomon. And so I wonder, I mean, I'm sure if it was for the sake of like judgment on Israel and things of that nature, like he could have,
like he did for the Benjaminites, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like he could have absolutely, elicited the participation of Judah to kind of bring destruction or judgment upon the rest of Israel. But yeah, I'm curious, like if he quote unquote had favorites, you know what I'm saying? Like if there was one of these countries over the other that he favored specifically, or was it essentially just whichever king most recently is worshiping him and actually on his side that he'd be supportive over? But
and maybe it wasn't like annihilate them, Lord, or help us go to war, but maybe even just like whatever problem he thought he had with Israel, like is that a problem?
Just handle that problem, like stop them from doing it. Good point. Okay. Well, we do get to Israel's next king, Nadab, who's the son of Jeroboam. He became king in the second year of Judah of Asa. And he reigned over Israel 2 years, so not very long at all. Continued to be evil, and we really kind of get like one paragraph on him essentially.
Yeah.
Because not much, because essentially Baasha, who's the son of Ahijah, which this is where I got confused, because Ahijah the prophet earlier on that helps Jeroboam, right? And ultimately that's the one that his wife, Jeroboam's wife, goes to, right?
Yeah.
Is that prophet Ahijah. Baasha is not, that's not his dad. Ahijah's not the same prophet. But then Baasha kind of conspires and kills him and all that. But what you find interesting here in 15 with Nadab's reign?
Yeah, this was the judgment, right? Like, this was the judgment that God talked about was going to be coming to Jeroboam's house.
Mm-hmm.
And we see it, like, shortly after he dies, like, Baasha comes and wipes out his sons and wipes out his household. That's what he did, right?
yeah. I mean, it took 2 years. He said, like, he dies, and 2 years later, his whole household's wiped out.
Yeah. And then he said that there's war between Asa and Baasha, which is the drama we're talking about here, right? That, like, there's drama between King Asa and Baasha. Yeah. And it's just drama. It's just a lot. When we're not walking with the Lord, it just becomes a lot.
Yeah. I don't know. One thing I'm finding interesting already, and I feel like I came across this a little bit with Samson as well when we were in his story, but like, I do find it interesting that even the people that God is raising up to defeat the people that he's, like, judging, they're not for him either.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, he's using people that aren't really dedicated to him to still fulfill his mission and his will, right? These are imperfect people, because as we get to at the end, like Baasha, I mean, he did was evil in the Lord's sight too.
Sure did.
Right? Like, it's not like he's this good king that would come next in Israel.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I just find it so interesting that it's just like God's will is going to be done, whether he has to use righteous or unrighteous. Like, he's going to do what he needs to do.
Yeah.
One way or the other. I just think that's really interesting.
Yeah. No, he definitely does, because it says each of these people, their hearts were, I mean, I feel like God wanted them to, like, choose him. Now that I've exalted you, but now they continue to choose themselves. And so, like you said, and their reigns don't last long. Like, Baasha is raised up, but then here he's already choosing Jehu to come and take him out. Like you said, the shout out to Jeroboam all the time.
I'm telling you.
I'll make your house like the house of Jeroboam. That means I'm finna wipe you out. And anyone who belongs to Baasha who dies in the city, the dogs will eat. Anyone who dies in the fields, the birds will eat. Like,
the exact same promise.
The exact same promise. Yeah. And so, and he dies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just so interesting to see that repeated over and over again.
Yeah.
But so we're still dealing with King Asa here in Judah. There's another king of Israel that is raised. It's Baasha's son Elah. He also only gets 2 years. It doesn't last long at all. Because Zimri kind of conspires against him and has him killed. And then Zimri doesn't last long.
He don't last long.
What do you get? 7 days? The Zimri guy?
That's it.
Yeah. Anything? I mean, let's go through a couple of these kings. I mean, anything that you just thought was interesting as you look through Elah or Zimri? We're just really kind of dealing with Omri. These are all Israel's kings that go in the time of King Asa. In those 42 years of King Asa, Israel's just running through kings. Anything that just jumped out to you here at 16?
Yeah. So I feel these people were put in this place just to do a certain task, right? Like, and so as soon as Elah, comes into the throne, like, it's Elah, right? Oh no, Zimri. I'm sorry. By the time Zimri comes into the throne, like, he now just kills all his Baasha's folk, and so they're out now. And then I think it's interesting because, like, they're still sinning. It's not getting any better. The Lord is still provoked with their idols. And then now, like you said, Zimri has conspired and killed the king, and now Omri is coming, the commander of the army, is coming. I think it was really interesting too, like how much clout the commanders of the armies had, like that. Really, the people would follow behind these like leaders of the army too, like sometimes even more so than the king. And so, I mean, I think it was a big deal that Joab was backing some of David's sons, right? Like that's why they had Joab at the table, right? It's because like he has clout, he has following, he has people under his command, like, and nobody's gonna rival the military. Like we're not doing that. And so I think it was more so interesting when we get to Omri. For me, this commander of the army who eventually becomes king, right? Like, and now he's the one reigning. I think we don't really see that too often, where it's kind of like the commander of the army becomes king. But this clout that he had.
Yeah, it's good. Couple things that just jumped out to me with Omri. I guess one thing is kind of a subtle thing, but verse 24 kind of points out that he buys this hill of Samaria, and that's kind of significant because Samaria ultimately becomes kind of like the capital of Israel, right? Like in that, and we fast forward, we know there's tension between the Samaritans and the Jews, which those that come from Judah essentially, and Jerusalem is their capital, right? Like we see kind of the establishment of Samaria kind of as that place. And, we even find later, like the woman at the well, or Samaritan woman, I should say, right, who refers kind of to this hill as the place of worship, like this place where like, we go here to worship God essentially because you guys won't let us come to the temple, right? That kind of thing. And so, I don't know. I just think there's this, it's easy to kind of just read over that, but like that was a significant just kind of establishment of, hey, this is where Samaria kind of comes into the picture as like a significant place in Israel.
Right. Because like you said, they're Israelites still, right? Like these are Israelites we're talking about who, have been ruled by a lot of foreign people and have a lot of foreign influence right now. Yeah. But still, at the heart of it all, these are part of the 12 tribes. And so he said this tension that happens, and why you even see the Samaritans are like mad at Israel too, is because it's kind of like, y'all treating us like this ain't our God too, but like he was our God too. Yeah. But as we see here, we see the many of years that they have turned from God, Israel and Judah. Yeah. At some points too, right? Like, but for more so for this lineage of Israel, these other 10 tribes, like there really was no back and forth, like to God, away from God, to God, away from God. Like they was straight up just sinning, Yeah,
it was very interesting.
Yeah, so I'm glad you pointed that out. But I do love that you said that how these books connect, because here in verse 34 we're talking about how this man goes and tries to build up what's it called, Jericho. And remember, they had a curse, like if anybody tries to build up Jericho, like their sons are going to die. Like, we're not doing this. Like, do not rebuild Jericho at all. And that was back in Joshua. And so now here we do see that in there's verse 34, this man tries to build it, and it says at the cost of his firstborn and at the cost of his youngest. Like, the word of the Lord came about, that like what she spoke to by Joshua.
Yeah, that was so good. I'm glad you brought up. That was on my list of things to say this week. Joshua 6:26, I believe, is where that is found specifically. And I love, like you said, that it's put in there specifically for the purpose of like, God kept his word. Just so you know, it's been generations, but some of it also just shows how far Israel has drifted, right? That they don't even think anything of that curse anymore. Essentially, it's kind of what it says, that this guy was just like, that curse don't matter. Like, I'm going to do this. Because I'm sure they had avoided it for so long because of what Joshua's curse said. Now they're at the point, they're like, his curse don't matter.
It might not even matter
anymore. Like, who that guy don't really, whatever. But it literally came true exactly as Joshua predicted way back then. And that mess is crazy because it's been hundreds of years to this point.
That part.
Since Joshua made that curse. And so, yeah, to see God keep his word even over those generations, it's just really cool to see. But all right, in the 16, Ahab, in that same piece, Ahab is the next king in line, and we will deal with Ahab for a while. So
Yeah.
he rules for a long time in Israel. And so we will see that he is also a pretty evil king.
Yeah.
For Israel, and not just an evil king, but he has an evil wife.
Yes.
Named Jezebel.
Which I've never seen a queen like get so much shout out ever next to these kings, but she must have been that bad.
She must have, because they give us her name.
They
right?
gave us her name.
Yeah.
And I love what my Bible says, and to make all things worse, like to make it worse, he married Jezebel.
Yeah.
If that wasn't enough.
Then if it's following the sin, that's literally what mine says. Then as if following the sin of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, were not enough, he married Jezebel. And so, yeah, Jezebel brings Baal into the god Baal into Israel as well, and into Jericho and all that. But it also brings to us in chapter 17 the introduction of a prominent prophet that we will get to know here in First Kings, and it's Elijah. So Elijah shows up in chapter 17. This victorious guy, one of her guys, Elijah and Elisha, who we'll get to here. Her favorite part of the entire Bible, probably these few chapters here. But yeah, Elijah shows up. The first thing he does, due to the sin of Israel, is just kind of announce there's going to be this famine. And from that, man, kind of comes a couple different stories. What jumps out to you here in 17 that you thought was significant?
Yeah. I mean, what Elijah in totality shows me is that you can do what the Lord's telling you to do, but still be hesitant and fearful sometimes as you're doing it, right? But I love that he still goes and does. Like, the Lord tells him to do something, come up against this king, which is a big deal. He's a king, right? He can kill you. But then sends him away and provides for him. The ravens are bringing him bread and meat. He's drinking from this brook. The brook dries up, and the Lord doesn't just leave him there. He tells them to go to Zarephath, and to stay with this widow, right? Like, to stay with somebody else who is not prominent, who is not thriving. Yeah. But because I send you here, I'm going to provide for you in the midst. And so I love that. Now, like, he tells him to go, and she has nothing. And I even just see, like, him being there as ministry too. Like, you know, that, like, she now is believing in this God. Yeah. Because this prophet has come, stay with her. He asked for this last of what she has. She gives it. Yeah. Right? Because she's like, I've heard of this God of yours, right? She knows of the God, right? He said, surely as your God lives, I've baked nothing. I'm going to have nothing baked, just a handful of jar of oil and stuff. And so she bakes it, and she's blessed. And they eat for many days. And the fact that, you know, he can say, thus says the Lord, God Israel, like, your flour is not going to go out. And then, you know, she still goes, bakes it. Because to me, I'm like, I don't know what your God talking about. This is it. Yeah. She could have been like, this is it. Like, I don't know what he's talking about. This is all I got. But she believes enough to still make her last and give it to this prophet. Yeah.
Yeah, I do love that story. I mean, I think it's also, again, reinforcing some of what we talked about with the foreigners, because she's not an Israelite or, you know, Jew. Like, she is a foreigner that he goes and does this miracle for. Right? And she has the faith, as you said, she's heard of this God, and she has the faith, right, to believe that what was possible. And I mean, it continues. Her son ultimately gets really sick, and you know, she feels like now all of a sudden, man, you must have been here to judge me in my sin. But you know, still has the faith to, like, just tell Elisha. And Elijah gets kind of raise him to heal him and
bring him back to life.
Yeah, give him life again. And so, yeah, you're right. There is this clear kind of caring for Elijah, but, like, you know, it's during this famine that Elijah is just kind of he's staying with his widow and whatnot. Essentially, what I feel like is just like waiting for the famine to be bad enough that Ahab and then will start to pay attention. Right. Because by the time he gets to 18, like he says after a long time,
3 years.
Yeah, he finally comes back to Ahab and goes, all right, like, bring me all your prophets, because now we have to have a demonstration. We got to show who the real God is.
The showdown.
Yeah, we got to have a showdown. And from here, we get to kind of declare who God is, and we'll ultimately bring the rain. It's kind of what will happen after that. But I thought it was interesting that, as you said, like, this happens, and Obadiah is kind of like tripping, because he's just like, this is back to 8. This is an 18 now. That, like, hold up, Ahab has been looking for you, bro.
Looking for years.
For years. And if I go tell him that you've been found and you disappear, it's gonna be my life. So, like, why would you? I'm on your side, man. I try to hide all these prophets. I hit 100 prophets into these 2Ks, 50 in each. I'm trying to do my part, man. Don't go get me over here in trouble, And Elijah's like, all right, I'll be there. Like, I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna show up.
Yeah.
And then like, we have this great moment. This is one that's again well known and discussed pretty often. Is this showdown with Elijah and these prophets. So as we end here today, because it's kind of our last bit of reading today, what jumped out to you as Elijah takes on the prophets of Baal?
Yeah. I think for me, of course, I mentioned before, I love this story, and Priscilla Shire has a study on it, which is one of my favorite studies. But I think it's really interesting that jumped out today to me is that these 400 prophets of Asherah, they say, eat at Jezebel's table. Like, these were her people, right? Like, and she was close to them. And I think that it was really interesting that, like, his first question to Israel, because it's like, okay, she might not know better, but y'all do. And so in verse 20, it's like, well, how long will y'all go back and forth between gods?
So
don't you? Right? It's like, how long y'all gonna do this?
Let that verse.
God and some others. And he was just like, let it be known today that, like, the Lord is God, so follow him. But if it's Baal, then follow him. Stop trying to do both.
Just pick one.
And the people didn't answer him. They had nothing to say back. It was like he had nothing. And so I do love to point out, though, that he keeps on saying, I'm the only one left, a prophet of the Lord. I'm the only one left. But the Lord, he makes this comment a couple of times, even in the next chapter. But clearly the Lord has saved some people that he just doesn't know about. So he feels alone. God's with him. But God hasn't even revealed to him, like, no, there will be others, right? Like, there will be others. But to be by yourself with 400 other people against you, like, yo, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this story. I love it, as you said, just kind of that declaration of who would you serve. It reminds me a little bit of that Joshua, right?
Yeah.
Like, choose whom today you will serve. But, like, as Joshua said too, choose life, right? Pick an option. This is your chance. Don't try to be in the middle. Don't try to be this, grayish versus black or white, lukewarm versus hot or cold. Like, just pick one. And then I also just love God's display, man. I am always, it's one of the things that always fascinates me about God, or the things that I love about God, is his just might and power.
Yeah.
Right? I love when he shows off. Like that's my God. That's how I like to read it. Like, and for him to take this demonstration, this show off, so just to, quick summarize it, and we've all read it here, but like, these two altars, they both bring their altar. I mean, they bulls set up an altar, and essentially it's which God is going to rain down fire and actually take up the offering. You don't get to light the fire. Your God got to bring the fire. We'll bring the sacrifice. You provide. No, sorry. The fire. I'll provide the sacrifice. Right.
That's my song.
So he's like, look, we're gonna bring the sacrifice. Your God got to bring the fire, and Baal and them can't pull it off.
Yeah.
He sleep. He whatever. He taunts them like he must be asleep. He must be on the road. Bring louder. But then to go and say, you know what? I'm gonna take it up a notch, and I'm gonna soak it, drench it with water. Like, I'm gonna show you.
Bring some more.
Yeah, bring some more. Fill up the trench around it. Like, make it make it as wet as possible for me to just show and prove who God is.
Yeah.
Like, I love that kind of stuff. I love that. Like, it's not, it's not a trick. It's not a magic trick.
Yeah.
It's not me hiding fire under my sleeve and I'm gonna throw something there. Like, no, I'm gonna make it look as hard and as possible.
Yeah.
And I love that. I just love that display specifically.
And I think what this even shows is like sometimes we can attribute things to like, or I believe they probably was attributing things to their God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this was happening because of our God. Like any favorable thing that happened, oh, it's because of the God of so and so.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's because of Baal was, happy. But like it's another thing to request something very specific from your God, right? And wait for that result. And so like that stuff, like you said, you cannot make up.
Yeah.
Like they probably this whole time, because I'm like, well, how could they believe that like their God is real when the God can't do anything? But it's like attributing certain things to their God that really wasn't their God at all.
Yeah. Right.
And so like I love it here that it's kind of like, well, this is the show up and show out of like who's the real God, because only the real true God is able to make things happen upon request like this.
Yeah.
Right. Not just for the sake of our benefit, but for the sake of like his glory and letting everyone else around us know that he is God.
Yeah.
Which
goes back to your point from Monday, right? This God versus God display that was so important to him. It was so important to God to make clear that he is the only God and no one else. And so but yeah, I mean, it really ends with that idea again, because even the famine is a display of God's power. The fact that he withholds rain for 3 years.
Yep.
It does not rain at all.
Your God does not control.
Right. I control the weather. And from Elijah's prayer after this display, he brings on rain, right? And finally kind of ends the drought and the famine. And so, yeah, I just think this is interesting. It's an amazing display of God just showing who he is and displaying his power and his might. So, yeah, but unfortunately, that doesn't end Elijah's trouble. It actually kind of stirs up some more trouble here that we'll get to tomorrow when we start chapter 19. But really just appreciate you guys joining us in our discussion today. I hope, again, this has been helpful and insightful. But we'll pick up on chapter 19 tomorrow and continue through the book of 1 Kings, actually conclude 1 Kings tomorrow, and we'll finish the rest of it. But until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.